In the grand, often severe theater of American public life, there are figures who occupy their roles as if born to them, their movements precise, their lines carefully rehearsed. And then every once in a while, a person steps onto the stage who seems to have wandered in from the world outside, someone who refuses to learn the script, who speaks with a voice that is unvarnished, unrehearsed, and utterly, shockingly human. This is the story of such a person. A woman who pirouetted on the stages of modern dance with the legendary Martha Graham, long before she ever walked the hallowed halls of the White House. A woman whose face graced the covers of magazines, not for her silent, demure elegance, but for a startling, revolutionary honesty. A woman who, through a series of historical accidents, found herself in the most powerful house in the world, and instead of being silenced by its immense marble presence, chose to fill it with a voice that was hers and hers alone. This is the story of a first lady who was first a dancer, a mother, a survivor, a trailblazer, and a reluctant revolutionary. This is the story of Betty Ford. Our story doesn't begin in the gilded corridors of power or the rarefied air of Washington, D.C. It begins, as so many American stories do, in the heartland. The place was Chicago, Illinois, the date April 8, 1918. The world was still reeling from the Great War, and a new, uncertain era was dawning. Into this world came Elizabeth Ann Bloomer, the third of 4 children, and the only daughter of William and Hortense Bloomer. Her father, William, was a traveling salesman for the Royal Rubber Company, a man of his era, gregarious, hard-working, and often absent, his life dictated by the rhythm of the road. Her mother, Hortense, was the anchor of the family, a woman of formidable strength and resilience who held the household together in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where the family soon settled. From her earliest days, Betty was different. While other girls might have been drawn to dolls and domestic play, Betty was captivated by something more ethereal, more expressive, movement. She felt a rhythm in the world that she needed to translate with her body. She found the language for this innate passion at the Calatrava School of Dance in Grand Rapids. For Betty, this was no mere after-school hobby. It was a calling, a discipline that gave her a sense of purpose and identity. The studio, with its polished floors and mirrored walls, became her sanctuary. There she learned not just the techniques of ballet and tap, but the profound joy of telling a story through the graceful arc of an arm or the powerful extension of a leg. She poured herself into it, and her talent was undeniable. By 1932, at the tender age of 14, her dedication earned her a coveted spot at the Bennington School of the Dance in Vermont for a summer session, a veritable crucible of creativity and the epicenter of the burgeoning modern dance movement. It was a world away from the quiet streets of Grand Rapids, and it ignited a fire in her. That fire would lead her, in the late 1930s, to the place where all artistic dreams either soared or were shattered, New York City. Imagine a young woman from Michigan, her spirit brimming with ambition, stepping into the vibrant, chaotic, and artistically supercharged atmosphere of the metropolis. She was there for one reason: to train with the high priestess of modern dance, the legendary Martha Graham. To be in Graham's orbit was to be at the heart of a cultural earthquake. Graham wasn't just a choreographer. She was a philosopher of movement, deconstructing dance to its emotional core of contraction and release. Her studio was a temple of intense, almost brutal discipline. Betty wasn't just learning steps. She was learning a new, raw, and visceral way to express the human condition. She was part of a generation of artists, dancers, painters, writers who were pushing boundaries, challenging every convention, and forging a new American identity. But this life, for all its artistic glory, was a precarious one. It was a world of endless auditions, fierce competition for a handful of spots in a company, and the constant gnawing uncertainty of financial survival. Betty modeled clothes for the John Robert Powers Agency and performed in Graham's auxiliary troupe to make ends meet. Her days a whirlwind of disciplined motion, and her nights filled with the dreams and anxieties of a life lived on the edge of artistic breakthrough. Then, history intervened. The world was engulfed in the flames of the Second World War, a global conflict that reshaped nations and individual lives with equal force. In 1942, Betty made a choice that would steer her life onto a more conventional, yet no less challenging, path. She married William Warren, a handsome furniture salesman she had known for years. On the surface, it was a logical step, a desire for stability in a world turned upside down. They were young, and the future seemed to hold a certain promise. But behind the facade of a wartime marriage, shadows were already beginning to gather and lengthen. The union, entered into with hope, soon began to fray. The reasons were complex, but one thread ran through the unraveling tapestry: William's struggle with alcoholism. It was a quiet, creeping disease that poisoned their life together. In the social circles of Grand Rapids, the truth was whispered, a source of local gossip. For Betty, it was a source of profound private pain. This early, intimate encounter with the devastating power of addiction, witnessing how it could warp a personality, shatter promises, and erode love, would become a recurring and ultimately defining theme in her life. It was a tragic, deeply personal foreshadowing of the battles that lay ahead for her. The marriage ended in divorce in 1947, a difficult and stigmatizing process for a woman in that era. Life, however, with its unpredictable rhythm of sorrow and grace, had another, more profound love in store for her. A year after her divorce, a friend arranged a date. The man was a local hero, a former University of Michigan football star, and a decorated naval officer who had served bravely in the Pacific Theater. He was now a young, ambitious lawyer with his sights set on politics. His name was Gerald R. Ford. Their courtship was a whirlwind. He was captivated by her grace, her intelligence, and her straightforward nature. She was drawn to his fundamental decency, his quiet strength, and his unwavering sense of purpose. They married on October 15, 1948, just 2 weeks before he was elected to his first term in the U.S. House of Representatives. Theirs was a partnership forged in love and mutual respect, a deep affection that would become the bedrock of their lives. Over the next 2.5 decades, Betty Ford fully embraced her new role. She became the consummate political spouse, a devoted mother, and a homemaker. Their family grew quickly. Michael was born in 1950, followed by John, known as Jack, in 1952, Stephen in 1956, and their daughter Susan in 1957. While Jerry's career in Congress steadily ascended, eventually leading him to become House Minority Leader, Betty's world was one of PTA meetings, Little League games, carpools, and the constant demanding logistics of raising 4 active children. It was a life lived largely outside the national spotlight. She was the anchor who provided a stable, loving home, often single-handedly, as Jerry's political duties kept him traveling constantly. It was in these years that the seeds of her own future struggles were quietly sown. A pinched nerve and a developing arthritis condition brought chronic pain, and with it, prescriptions from doctors who were all too willing to offer a pill to ease the suffering of a busy congressman's wife. The occasional cocktail to unwind from a stressful day began to blur into a more regular habit. It was a quiet, private struggle, hidden behind the demands of a public life. Then, the unpredictable currents of history surged, pulling the Fords from their established life and thrusting them into the center of a national storm. The political scandals of the early 1970s, a slow burn crisis that came to be known simply as Watergate, began to unravel the Nixon administration. In 1973, when Vice President Spiro Agnew resigned in a separate corruption scandal, President Nixon needed a nominee who was impeccably clean, a figure of unimpeachable integrity who could be confirmed by a deeply divided Congress. He chose Gerald Ford. Betty's reaction to the news was famously ambivalent. She was happy for her husband, but she had a premonition that their quiet, private life was over forever. She was right. Less than a year later, as the Watergate crisis reached its explosive climax, President Richard Nixon, facing certain impeachment, did the unthinkable. He resigned. On August 9, 1974, in a somber ceremony that felt more like a funeral than an inauguration, Gerald R. Ford took the oath of office, becoming the 38th President of the United States. And just like that, with no campaign, no election, no preparation, Betty Ford, the dancer from Grand Rapids, the devoted wife and mother, the woman who had just been looking forward to her husband's retirement from Congress, became the First Lady of the United States. She entered a White House shrouded in gloom. The nation was grappling not only with the aftermath of the Vietnam War and a sputtering economy, but now with an unprecedented crisis of faith in its own government. The role of the First Lady had traditionally been one of quiet elegance, a decorative and smiling presence meant to soften the hard edges of politics. But Betty Ford was not a woman to be confined by tradition or silenced by circumstance. She entered the White House with an authenticity and a candor that was like a window thrown open in a stuffy, airless room. It was startling, and for a nation starved of honesty, it was deeply refreshing. One of her most immediate and impactful actions came just weeks after moving into 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. During a routine medical exam, her doctor discovered a lump in her right breast. The diagnosis was swift and terrifying: breast cancer. In an era when cancer was the C word, a disease spoken of only in hushed, fearful tones, a subject of profound shame and social stigma, Betty Ford made a decision of astonishing courage. She refused to hide. She went public with her diagnosis. She spoke openly, not just about the cancer, but about the specific, unvarnished details of her radical mastectomy. Her frankness shattered a national taboo overnight. Women across the country who had suffered in silence or had been too afraid to even examine themselves suddenly felt seen, heard, and empowered. The Betty Ford effect, as the media dubbed it, was immediate and dramatic. Cancer hotlines were flooded. Doctors' offices were inundated with requests for screenings. She had, in a single act of radical transparency, saved countless lives. Her ordeal wasn't without its own terror. In the aftermath of the surgery, she developed a near-fatal blood clot, a stark reminder of the fragility of life, even for a woman now surrounded by the best medical care in the world. But her outspokenness was just getting started. If her candor about cancer had opened a door, her famous 1975 interview on the television program 60 Minutes blew the door off its hinges. Sitting down with correspondent Morley Safer Betty Ford, the Republican First Lady, calmly and thoughtfully dropped a series of bombshells that sent shockwaves through the political establishment. She stated her firm support for the Supreme Court's decision in Roe v. Wade, affirming a woman's right to an abortion. When asked what she would do if her daughter Susan came to her and said she was having an affair, Betty replied she'd counsel her but ultimately support her, acknowledging the reality of premarital sex. She even mused that she wouldn't be surprised if her children had tried marijuana, and spoke with nuance about its potential for decriminalization. For the conservative wing of the Republican Party, this was nothing short of heresy. The backlash was swift and fierce. The White House was deluged with letters of protest. Yet for every letter of condemnation, there was another of praise. For a generation of Americans, particularly young women who felt alienated from the political process, her words were a revelation. Here was a woman in the White House who didn't speak in carefully crafted talking points. She sounded like them. She understood their concerns. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind, even if it was unpopular and politically inconvenient for her husband. This raw honesty extended to her own family struggles. When her son Jack admitted in a 1975 Rolling Stone interview that he had smoked marijuana, the story could have become a political nightmare, a symbol of a dysfunctional first family. But Betty, ever the protective and understanding mother, refused to play the game of public condemnation. She defended him, acknowledging the realities of a changing world and the pressures faced by young people. This wasn't the carefully curated, impossibly perfect image of a political family that Americans were used to. This was real life, with all its messiness, complexities, and imperfections, playing out on the national stage. Behind the scenes, however, a desperate private battle was raging, a storm that had been gathering for years. The immense, unrelenting pressures of public life, the chronic pain that was a constant companion, and the pervasive culture of prescription medication had finally converged, pulling Betty down a dark and lonely path. She had become critically dependent on the very things that were supposed to be helping her, alcohol and prescription pain medication. It was a secret she guarded fiercely, a source of deep, gnawing shame and profound pain. The woman who had so bravely faced down cancer in the full glare of the public eye was now in the grips of a disease that was just as deadly, but far more insidious, one that thrived in darkness and secrecy. The public, for the most part, remained unaware, but those closest to her, her family, and her staff saw the heartbreaking signs, the slurred speech she tried to pass off as fatigue, the unsteady gait, the moments of confusion, the emotional volatility. The turning point came in 1978, a year after the Fords had left the White House, defeated in a close election by Jimmy Carter. Her family, their hearts breaking, could no longer stand by and watch her self-destruct. Led by her daughter Susan, they staged an intervention. Imagine that scene. The family she loved so dearly gathered in a room, their faces etched with a mixture of love, fear, and resolve, confronting her with the devastating truth of her addiction. It was a painful, raw, and confrontational experience, but it was, at its core, an act of profound love. They had to shatter the wall of denial she had built around herself, brick by brick. The intervention was a success. Confronted with the undeniable reality of her situation and the deep pain she was causing, Betty agreed to seek help. She was admitted to the alcohol and drug rehabilitation program at Long Beach Naval Hospital in California. The detoxification process was grueling, a physical and psychological ordeal. She suffered from terrifying seizures, a common and dangerous symptom of withdrawal from her cocktail of medications. But she persevered. And just as she had done with her breast cancer, Betty Ford made another decision of breathtaking courage. She chose to share her story with the world. In an act of extraordinary bravery, she went public with her alcoholism and her addiction to prescription drugs. Once again, she took a sledgehammer to a wall of silence and stigma. At a time when addiction was widely misunderstood as a moral failing, a character flaw, a sign of weakness, Betty Ford helped to reframe the national conversation. She insisted that addiction was a disease, a chronic illness that required medical treatment and compassionate support, not moral judgment. Her 1987 book, Betty, A Glad Awakening, was a landmark publication, a raw and unflinchingly honest account of her descent into the hell of addiction and her arduous but ultimately triumphant journey to recovery. Her personal struggle gave birth to a powerful new purpose. In 1982, alongside her close friend, former Ambassador Leonard Firestone, she co-founded the Betty Ford Center in Rancho Mirage, California. This was not to be just another hospital. It was a treatment facility built on the revolutionary principles of dignity, respect, and evidence-based care, with a special focus on the unique needs of women. It would become a world-renowned institution, a beacon of hope for thousands upon thousands of individuals and families struggling with the devastating disease of addiction. It was a place where they could find healing, community, and a path back to a life of sobriety. Betty Ford's life was not only marked by her public triumphs and private battles, but also by a series of profound and heartbreaking losses that shaped the resilient woman she became. The first and perhaps most formative of these tragedies struck when she was just 16 years old. On a grim day, August 6, 1934, she discovered the body of her beloved father, William Bloomer. He had died of carbon monoxide poisoning in the family's garage. While the official cause of death was ruled accidental, the specter of suicide has always loomed over the event, a dark cloud of unspoken grief for the family. To find her father in such a way, at such a young and impressionable age, was a trauma of immeasurable magnitude, one that would undoubtedly leave an indelible silent mark on her psyche. The pain of loss would revisit her throughout her life. In 1948, the very same year she found new hope and love in her marriage to Gerald Ford, her mother Hortense, her anchor and source of strength, died of a sudden heart attack. Then in 1967, another devastating blow. Her brother William Bloomer Jr. died at the age of 49 from cirrhosis of the liver, a direct and tragic result of his own long battle with alcoholism. This intimate, repeated exposure to the destructive consequences of addiction within her own family undoubtedly shaped her deep understanding and her profound empathy for others who struggled with the disease. Even in her later years, after she had become a global symbol of recovery and resilience, the specter of mortality was never far away. Her 1974 breast cancer diagnosis was a life-or-death struggle played out on the world stage. The subsequent blood clot was a terrifying, tangible reminder of her mortality. And her collapse in 1978, the event that finally precipitated her entry into rehab, was the moment she came perilously close to losing her life to the disease of addiction. Each of these tragedies, these harrowing brushes with death, seemed not to break her, but to forge in her a deeper resolve, a greater appreciation for the preciousness of life, and a more profound, unwavering commitment to helping others navigate their own dark nights of the soul. Betty Ford's legacy is a testament to the astonishing power of a single, authentic voice to effect profound and lasting change. She completely redefined the role of the First Lady, transforming it from a largely ceremonial position into a powerful platform for advocacy and social progress. She was a vocal and passionate supporter of the Equal Rights Amendment, ERA, championing women's rights at a time when those rights were still fiercely contested. She lobbied state legislators, gave speeches, and refused to be silent. Her support for abortion rights, while controversial, was a consistent reflection of her core belief in a woman's autonomy over her own body and her own life. In 1991, her immense contributions to the nation were formally recognized when she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. It was a fitting tribute to a woman who had served her country not with political calculation, but with grace, courage, and an unwavering, sometimes searing, honesty. Betty Ford lived a long, full, and extraordinary life, a life of incredible highs and devastating lows. She passed away on July 8, 2011, at the age of 93 in Rancho Mirage, California, the desert community she had come to love. The cause of death was listed as natural causes. Her funerals, held in Palm Desert, and her beloved Grand Rapids were attended by a nation that had come to admire, respect, and genuinely love her. She was laid to rest beside her husband at the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Museum in Grand Rapids, the final quiet chapter in a remarkable American love story that had spanned more than half a century. In her will, she left a lasting legacy of compassion, bequeathing an estimated $20 million estate to continue funding addiction programs, ensuring that her life's most important work would continue to help others long after she was gone. Time magazine, in its tribute, hailed her as a candid healer, a perfect encapsulation of the woman who had courageously used her own wounds to help heal the wounds of a nation. The story of Betty Ford is, in the end, a story of transformation. It is the story of a dancer who became a first lady, a wife and mother who became a national icon, a woman who battled her own private demons in public and emerged as a beacon of hope for millions. She was a woman who was not afraid to be vulnerable, to be imperfect, to be flawed, to be, in a word, human. And in that very humanity, she found her greatest strength and her most enduring power. She taught us that it's okay not to be okay. She taught us that there is no shame in asking for help and that our greatest struggles can often become the source of our most profound purpose. Her voice, once a surprising and often controversial sound in the august halls of the White House, has become a timeless echo, an echo of courage, of compassion, and of the revolutionary power of unwavering authenticity. She was a woman who spoke her truth, and in doing so, she gave countless others the courage to finally speak theirs. And that perhaps is her most beautiful and enduring legacy.